Good afternoon, Lions Nation. We're now in the month of June, but Detroit never sleeps, and you need to stay alert because something very important is happening inside the Detroit Lions organization right now, and if you're paying attention to the direction of this team heading into 2026, you can already feel the mindset beginning to shift. After a season that fell short of expectations, one of the biggest voices inside the locker room has made it clear that nobody is dwelling on the past anymore. Amon-Ra St. Brown recently spoke about the mentality surrounding the team, and his comments reveal exactly where the Lions stand as preparations continue for the upcoming season. According to St. Brown, the disappointment of last year remains in the past. The focus now is entirely on getting back to the standard that helped transform Detroit into one of the most respected teams in football over the last several seasons. What stood out the most was his discussion about motivation. St. Brown talked about how success can sometimes create a sense of comfort. When a team wins consistently for multiple years, it becomes easy to believe that things will continue working automatically. But he acknowledged that every victory increases the target on your back. Opposing teams know who the Lions are now. They know the reputation Detroit has built. They know the atmosphere waiting for them inside Ford Field. And speaking of Ford Field, St. Brown had tremendous praise for Lions fans. He emphasized the energy the crowd brings and how much of a difference that support makes for the players on game day. Detroit's home field advantage has become one of the strongest in the NFL, and according to one of the team's biggest stars, the fans continue to be a major reason why. Perhaps the most encouraging part of his comments was his confidence in the people currently inside the building. St. Brown made it clear that the team believes it has the right players and the right leadership to get back where it wants to be. That confidence starts from the top of the organization and extends throughout the entire roster. But while Detroit is focused on its own improvement, a major development elsewhere in the NFC has created a new challenge. The trade that sent Myles Garrett to the Los Angeles Rams immediately changed the conversation around the conference. Even though the Lions do not face the Rams during the regular season, the impact is impossible to ignore. The NFC was already loaded with contenders, and now one of the league's most dominant defensive players joins a team that already had championship aspirations. For months, Lions fans debated whether Brad Holmes should pursue Garrett if he became available. The possibility generated endless discussions. The idea of pairing Garrett with Aiden Hutchinson sounded like a dream scenario for many supporters, but ultimately, Detroit never made that move, and there are several reasons why. The first is financial reality. The Lions have already invested heavily in key players and have more major contracts approaching. Maintaining the core of this roster remains a priority, with future deals involving important young talent expected down the road. Committing massive resources to another superstar would have significantly altered Detroit's long-term plan. There is also the simple fact that Brad Holmes has consistently built this team through drafting and development. Time after time, he has emphasized building from within. The Lions already possess a premier pass rusher in Aiden Hutchinson, and Holmes has repeatedly suggested that the organization is not necessarily interested in constructing a roster around two highly paid star edge rushers. Then there is the trade package itself. Acquiring a player of Garrett's caliber would likely have required not only premium draft picks, but also valuable young talent. Detroit's front office would have needed to decide whether sacrificing part of its future was worth making such a dramatic move. In the end, the Lions stayed true to the philosophy that helped build the roster into a contender in the first place. That doesn't mean the trade is irrelevant. Far from it. The Rams immediately become an even bigger obstacle in the NFC playoff picture. If Detroit reaches the postseason, which many expect, there is a realistic possibility that the road to the Super Bowl could run through Los Angeles. That's where Garrett's arrival becomes significant. Not because he plays against Detroit during the regular season, but because he could become one of the biggest barriers standing between the Lions and a championship opportunity. At the same time, inside Detroit, the belief remains strong that the current roster is capable of competing at the highest level. The organization continues to trust its process, trust its young players, and trust the culture that has been established over the last several years. The question now becomes whether that approach will be enough as the competition across the NFC continues getting stronger and stronger. With the Rams making such a massive move and the Lions choosing to stay committed to their existing blueprint, did Detroit make the right decision by not pursuing Myles Garrett, or or will this trade eventually become a major turning point in the NFC playoff race? Another topic that deserves attention is the recognition some Lions players are finally starting to receive around the league, even if many people still believe they remain underrated compared to bigger national names. One of those players is Amon-Ra St. Brown. Despite becoming one of the most productive receivers in football, St. Brown continues to be overlooked in certain conversations. The numbers tell a completely different story. Since entering the league, he has consistently established himself among the NFL's elite receivers. His production, reliability, route running, toughness, and ability to move the chains have become defining characteristics of Detroit's offense. What makes his story even more impressive is where it began. St. Brown was selected in the 4th round, and since the moment he arrived in Detroit, he has played with the mentality of someone trying to prove every team wrong for passing on him. Years later, that motivation has never disappeared. His impact goes far beyond statistics. He became one of the faces of Detroit's turnaround and one of the foundational pieces of the culture that transformed the Lions from a struggling franchise into a legitimate contender. Every season, he continues finding new ways to elevate his game, and there is little indication that he plans on slowing down anytime soon. The discussion about underrated players also included DJ Reed. Reed's NFL journey has been far from easy. Drafted much later than many of the league's top cornerbacks, he spent years proving that his size would not prevent him from becoming an effective player. His consistency throughout multiple seasons earned him respect around the league and established him as one of the more dependable defensive backs in football. However, his first season with Detroit did not unfold the way many expected. Injuries played a role, and his performance did not reach the level Lions fans were hoping to see. That is exactly why 2026 becomes such an important season for him. The talent has always been there. The question is whether he can return to the form he displayed before injuries became a factor. And that leads directly into one of the most fascinating storylines surrounding the team right now, the OTA sessions and the players who could dramatically influence Detroit's season depending on how they perform. One name that immediately stands out is Ennis Rakestraw Jr. Few players on the roster carry as much uncertainty entering this stage of the offseason. The talent is obvious, but availability remains the biggest concern. The Lions need to see him stay healthy, remain on the field, and continue developing. If he can finally put everything together, Detroit's secondary could gain an entirely new dimension. Think about the possibilities. A healthy and productive Rakestraw would not only strengthen the starting lineup, but would also significantly improve the depth throughout the defensive backfield. In today's NFL, depth in the secondary can make the difference between a good defense and a championship caliber defense. The reality, however, is that nothing can happen unless he proves he can stay available. That is why so many eyes will be focused on him throughout these offseason practices. Another player drawing attention is Miles Frazier. Competition along the offensive line remains one of the most important battles on the roster. Detroit has built much of its success around physical dominance in the trenches, and maintaining that identity requires constant competition. Frazier's versatility makes him particularly intriguing because he offers flexibility at multiple positions. Any player capable of contributing across the offensive line immediately becomes valuable. Coaches love versatility, especially when injuries inevitably occur during a long NFL season. Then there is Blake Miller. The Lions continue looking toward the future at the tackle position, and Miller represents another developmental player worth monitoring. The physical tools are there, and every OTA rep provides another opportunity to show growth. But perhaps no young player will face more attention than Derek Moore. The reason is simple. The Lions desperately need pass rush production opposite Aiden Hutchinson. Every defense becomes more dangerous when offenses cannot focus all their protection on one player. Hutchinson already commands enormous attention from opposing offensive lines. If Moore can emerge as a legitimate threat, the entire defensive front benefits. Suddenly quarterbacks have fewer places to escape. Suddenly protection schemes become more complicated. Suddenly Detroit's defense becomes significantly more dangerous. That is why his progress could become one of the most important developments of the offseason. And then we return once again to DJ Reed. Because if there is one theme connecting several of these storylines, it is the importance of bounce-back performances. The Lions are not necessarily asking every player to become a superstar overnight. yet. They simply need certain players to return to the level that made them valuable in the first place. If Reed rediscovers his previous form, if Rakestraw stays healthy, if Moore develops into a legitimate pass rushing threat, and if the offensive line competition produces another reliable contributor, Detroit's roster becomes deeper and more complete than many people realize. That is what makes this stage of the offseason so important. Championship teams are not built solely through blockbuster trades and headline-grabbing acquisitions. Sometimes they are built through internal development, healthy competition, and players taking major steps forward when their opportunity arrives. As OTA practices begin and these battles start taking shape, Lions fans have every reason to pay close attention because some of the names generating the fewest headlines today could end up playing massive roles when the games actually begin. What makes all of this even more interesting is that the Lions are entering a phase where expectations are no longer a novelty. A few years ago, simply being competitive was enough to generate excitement. Now that standard has completely changed. The expectation inside Detroit is no longer about making noise. The expectation is winning championships. That shift changes everything. It changes how players are evaluated. It changes how off-season decisions are judged. It changes how fans react to moves that are made and moves that are not made. That is exactly why the conversation surrounding the Myles Garrett trade became so intense among Lions supporters. Many fans viewed Garrett as the final piece that could potentially push Detroit over the top. Others believe staying disciplined and continuing to build through the draft remained the smarter long-term approach. Both arguments have merit, but ultimately the organization stayed committed to its philosophy, and when you look at Brad Holmes' track record, it is easy to understand why. Many of the core players responsible for Detroit's rise were drafted and developed internally. The Lions have built one of the strongest cultures in football by identifying players who fit their system, fit their mentality, and fit their long-term vision. That process produced players like Amon-Ra St. Brown, who continues proving that draft position means very little once the games begin. It produced players who embraced competition instead of avoiding it. It produced a locker room filled with players who understand exactly what is expected every single day. That culture may be tested more than ever in 2026, not because the Lions suddenly became weaker, but because every opponent now approaches Detroit differently. Years ago, teams might have looked at the Lions on the schedule and expected an easy victory. Those days are gone. Now opponents circle Detroit as one of the toughest matchups of the season. That is exactly what St. Brown was talking about when discussing the growing target on the team's back. Success creates attention, success creates pressure, success creates opponents that spend extra time preparing specifically for you. The Lions are no longer hunting, they are being hunted. And handling that reality is one of the biggest challenges any contender faces.